This is the landmark case Kent versus the United States. It's citation 383 U.S., or the United States 541, and took place in 1966. The case was argued on January 19th of 1966 in the U.S. Supreme Court, and the decision was made on March 21st of 1966. The general overview of this landmark case is it really has a lot to do with the juvenile court system and the due process rights that juveniles have. So basically, a juvenile court waived the jurisdiction of a teen to be tried as an adult at the age of 16. The juvenile did not receive a hearing, access to counsel, or access to his records prior to the waiver. And then this case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Here's a little bit of background information on Morris A. Kent Jr. He was 16 when his rights were waived as a juvenile to be tried as an adult. He was accused of committing several robberies and rapes. He was indicted on 3 counts of housebreaking, 3 counts of robbery, and 2 counts of rape. This was not his first time in the juvenile courts. He was taken into custody when he was 14 in 1959 for several housebreakings and attempted purse snatching. The juvenile courts and the District of Columbia placed him on probationary and released him to his mother's. While underneath probation, he again broke that when he was 16 with these other instances. According to his principal, Kent showed serious behavioral problems and needed psychological help. Both his mother and father were also well aware of his mental health and were not able to share that information prior to his trial. Kent was later released after the Supreme Court decision from the St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital, where he was confined for most of his court proceedings. So with the court, the district court, the Court of Appeals, and during the U.S. Supreme ruling, all of that time, or most of that time, was spent at St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital. Once the courts made their decision and the decision was made, he was no longer in the system. He married, he had children, and he worked at a printing company. And he did not have any more run-ins with the criminal justice system after this. So here is how Kent's case progression went. He was first accused of committing several robberies, again on housebreaking, robbery, and rape. His case at the beginning in the juvenile court system was waived under the statute of the code 11-1551. And this waiver permits the jurisdiction after full investigation and allows a judge to waive the rights of that person to be punishable by death or life imprisonment under the criminal proceedings and not the juvenile court. Kent's counsel did make a motion to the courts for a hearing on the question of the waiver after a psychiatric's finding. The court did not listen to those. The juvenile court judge did not rule on any of these motions that were sent by his counsel. So the juvenile court held no hearing. He did not confer with the petitioner or parents or counsel, and he went ahead and entered an order to waive jurisdiction of the petitioner without reasons on the waiver. So again, the court then, Kent was indicted on September 5th of 1961. On November 16th of 1961, Kent and his counsel moved to have the district court dismiss his indictment on the grounds of the waiver, that the waiver was invalid. And so was a habeas corpus proceedings. The district court dismissed this on February 8th of 1963, saying it was upheld. The district court held a hearing on the petitioner's motion on his competency to stand trial in March of 1963. The court determined that he was competent, even though he had a mental health illness. Kent appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, and this court also affirmed what was already decided by the district court. So then they appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. At the Supreme Court, the case was reversed and directed back to the district courts to hold a full dress de novo hearing to determine whether his waiver should have been waived or not in 1961. So, and then the Supreme Court made it go back down to the District Appeals of Court and the District Court. And then the District Court found that the decision could not be sustained because Kent was suffering from a mental illness during the time frame. And so the waiver was inappropriate. Here were some laws that really went into laws or court issues that either helped or assisted the Kent case. So the Civil Commitment Law, DC Code 21541, this allows a person to be involuntarily committed only if he or she is likely to injure himself or other persons due to mental illness. The Juvenile Court Act, and this one I think is really big, is the difference between a Juvenile Court Act and the criminal court. A juvenile one, they have proceedings designated as civil rather than criminal. They're based on social welfare and more of the restorative justices. They want to provide measures of guidance and rehabilitation for those children in protection underneath the juvenile court. So really like to help them so that they don't end up in the criminal courts. And another one was the Parens Patria, which is Code 162316. And this gives this the state or government is regarded as the legal protectors of citizens unable to protect themselves because his parents couldn't pay for legal counsel. That's where that part comes in. Another piece underneath, another law underneath this was the juvenile waiver provisions, which was a big piece of Kent's case. This provision, or this code 11-1553, counsel is required at this level to have informal proceedings. So that means that Kent should have had legal counsel. Kent's case changed this provision in the case because his parents lacked the means of providing the money for attorney. Okay, and so he should have been able to have an attorney. Only attorney can ensure or represent the individual's interest. And basically what they're saying here is judges, because they have big docket cases in the juvenile court system, it's too much to remember or to think of that only that child when they have all these other different cases and all the legal proceedings that go with it. Parents don't understand, most parents don't understand the legal system. And caseworkers, they are not there to address legal proceedings. They're there to address like health and wellness concerns. So really that job is the job of legal counsel. And again, that legal counsel wasn't there for Kent, or he was, but he wasn't heard during that trial. If we go back here so that was some of the laws that really affected this court case. Here were some other court cases that either came before or after the Kent. The Harling versus the United States, this came before Kent's in the United States Supreme Court. And this case addressed the issues about effective assistance of legal counsel, which we noticed is a big part of Kent's case. There was not, legal counsel was trying to help, but it wasn't there before the decisions were made. The Regal case came after the Kent versus United States Supreme Court decision. And this was the big one that really laid out, and in Kent's, that this case changed the juvenile law of 1967, which gave juveniles accused of crimes the same due process rights of adults, which wasn't happening, but kind of was decided in the Kent versus United States Supreme Court. The Kent versus United States Supreme Court, they reviewed the philosophy of the juvenile court system's laws. And they felt like the court's reached a result of tremendous consequences without any ceremony. Okay, so that means they didn't have a hearing. They did not have effective assistance of counsel. There was not a statement of reason of why they waived the rights of the juvenile. And then it says the Kent versus United States Supreme Court, this is continued, it says the hearing must satisfy the basic requirements of due process and fairness, and that was not done in the Kent versus Kent versus the district court. So this is the petitioner's arguments, and this is what Kent's side argued, or legal counsel. They said they petitioned the court to dismiss the waiver to be tried as an adult due to his mental illness. They petitioned for the hearing to determine that his competency to stand trial, because he was mentally ill, he could not stand trial. They also petitioned the courts for grounds of reversal because the petitioner's detention and interrogation were unlawful. So Kent was in custody for an amount of time, and they neither contacted or notified his parents, and he did not have legal counsel during the interrogation. So those were big pieces that helped turn over this case. So here was the court's, this is how they defended. And it says the district court denied motions of dismissal because they felt the juvenile court was within statutory provisions and no hearing was required. And in this was a big part of that decision, because the juvenile courts did have, within reason, they could waiver. This court also determined that they defended that he was competent, that Kent was competent, even though he was in a mental institution hospital. The Court of Appeals argues that the Juvenile Court Act allows juvenile courts to act within reason of determining whether they should retain jurisdiction, and then they felt that the judge had made that decision, and they felt they had met that determination. So what did the Supreme Court consider during their conclusion? Their biggest question was the juveniles court's waiver of jurisdiction valid? The Supreme Court founded or concluded that not enough evidence and investigation was done before the juvenile court waived the jurisdiction for Kent. So what they decided to do is they sent the case back down to the District Court of Appeals and then the District Court. And they wanted them to determine whether the waiver was proper. And then it says, and the reason that they made this is they said, is it true that the juveniles court has a substantial degree of discretion? And they said, yes, they do, but in determining whether the waiver jurisdiction, but it must consider the philosophy of the Juvenile Court Act. And that's where a big piece of their decision came from, was that really following the philosophy of the juvenile court? So what are the implications for our juveniles? Well, because of this case, the juveniles now have a right to the due process procedures when it comes to determining their rights, whether the rights should be waived in criminal circumstances. So the things that they have to do is they have to have parental notification. They have to have right to legal counsel. They have to have a right to hearing and a statement for reasoning for the determination of why they are going to waive their rights. They have to have a reasoning in there, which Kent's judge did not. The juvenile system is really designed to protect your children from being tried as adults and to provide more rehabilitation tactics to help those individuals so that they don't end up in the criminal system. How is this significant for the educational setting? Well, again, in the educational setting, you're dealing with juveniles who are not of age. And they, again, when it comes to discipline or being suspended or expelled from school, they have a right to the due process. So they have a right to a hearing. Parents have to be notified. The student has to be notified. They have to have a hearing before they can be expelled from the school. But that also goes into effect if they're being suspended. They have to have parental notification. They have to notify the student. They have to tell them what was the offense that they did. And then they also have, even in both a suspension and expulsion, they do have a right to legal counsel and a right to a hearing and a statement for reasoning for the determination. So these are all in steps and process for these students. These were the resources I used, the Kent versus United States and the two decisions in search of theory. I have the Kent versus United States on Ozzie, and then I have the Morris A. Kent Jr. Appellant versus United States of America. And then because it's been the 50th year anniversary of Kent, the decision has sparked the transformation of the juvenile defense. And these were the resources I used.